He was elected here to the Basketball Hall of Fame in the class of 2011. Please join me in welcoming home our special guest, Mr. Artis Gilmore. Welcome home.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening. How's everybody? I heard that very enthusiastic welcome that you got just a moment ago.
Absolutely.
Paul,
Thank you. It's a joy to have you here. So begin at the beginning for some of our friends who don't know your story. And I should point out that if anyone wants to learn more about Mr. Gilmore, there's a new wonderful book out that you've published called Here Comes the A Train, which I just bought my copy of today. And
thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Come out and take a read. But begin, if you could. I've spent a lot of places in Florida and different places. I've never been in Chipley, Florida, where you were born. Can you tell us a little bit about that part of the Panhandle where you grew up?
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Chipley, Florida. So how many of you had an opportunity to travel to Chipley, Florida?
Anybody?
Hold up your hand, please. Well, this is not the appropriate way, but if you look at Florida on a diagram, it looks sort of like a handgun. So if you travel out on the barrel, about the center of the barrel, and it's just right below the Alabama line. And from Chipley to Dothan, Alabama is where I graduated from high school. There's about 30 miles. And so that really short distance to that line is not that far away from my hometown, Chipley. It's 122 miles east of Pensacola. Mm-hmm. And if you're traveling west, Tallahassee is about 90 miles west of Tallahassee. And so if you're traveling south to Panama City, Florida, which is on the Gulf, that's about 50 miles. And it's really closer to Dothan, Alabama than it is to Panama City.
And what was like for you? I know you came from, you had a large family growing up in Chipley, not a family of great means, obviously. You've spoken a lot about that. But what was your life like as a little boy growing up in Chipley?
Yes, in Chipley, Florida, it was, and my thinking in terms of those early years as a kid growing up in Chipley, Florida, really challenging is not even the terminology, appropriate terminology. It was really tough times in the country itself, dealing with racism and just the issues of that particular time. And there was 9 members of my family. We lost one kid early on, so there was really 8 of us that grew up together in a little small, really was not necessarily a home. It was a little barn, but it was a little fixture. And I remember in really early years, we used kerosene lamps. How many of you had an opportunity to use kerosene lamps when you were kids growing up? I'm looking at all these big guys. The little guy with the blue shorts on, barely walking, yeah. I know he used kerosene lamps. But anyways, those were, I remember those really challenging times as a family when there was lack of food and a number of other things. But my mother and father, they really worked hard to try to make things provided in the family. So we had a tough hand. Was dealt a tough hand, but we were able to meet the challenges.
Well, you told me that despite the fact that your family was scrambling a lot, your dad would fish to try to get food on the table, and your mom was working hard to take care of the large family. You still had a lot of time to play, and I know you said you loved football, in particular when you were a little boy, liked to play. Before you loved basketball, I think you were intrigued by football. Absolutely, and for most of us, I'm not certain what part of the country all of you are from, but if you're from like the lower part of South Carolina all the way back to Texas, you understand that's football country. I mean, everybody loves football. And especially in Jacksonville, we host every year the Georgia-Florida game, which is a huge event.
They said that's one of the most social cocktail parties in the world. But they have between 500,000 people that come and visit Jacksonville during that time. But absolutely, it's a unique time.
But you started to play basketball, I think, in elementary school. Is that correct? Your brother first introduced you to the game. Is that true?
My oldest brother, yes. Yeah. And then football. We talked about football, but there was another little issue there. When I was 12 years old, I wore a size 12 shoe. So you can imagine as my age started to escalate, what happens in that process. When I turned 13, and Chipley, well, when I describe Chipley is about the size of this room right here. Or it was when I was a kid growing up.
Yeah.
We had one stoplight, and so when I turned 12, and when I reached the age of 13, I wore a size 13 shoe. And so can you imagine my mother in Chipley, Florida, trying to find a place to purchase a pair of shoes, which she didn't have the funds for. And so in other words, I was barefooting. And there was a song that came out, barefooting. I was barefooting. Well, actually, in reality, I was really barefooting. Yeah. So I didn't have the tools, really, when you speak in terms of basketball shoes and things to work with. They were not available to me or for me. So about a year and a half, a couple of years or so later, I was probably well over 14 years old, and there was during that time there was individuals that would drive through the neighborhood, and they would have products, and the individual people in the neighborhood would purchase it from their vehicle. So they sold things right out of their car, and this gentleman just had this pair of shoes, and he was after my mother negotiated a deal. She said, "Well, I don't have any money." He said, "Well, I'm through here all the time," and she gave him like 50 cents or something like that, And so, but the most important thing about the whole deal, this particular deal, was that this gentleman had a little booklet. It was called King Size Ink, and we gave my mother that booklet, and we were actually used that book I used that book for the next 20 years. In fact, I just probably lost it about a year or two ago. But I ordered everything that was necessary for me to use from that particular time. But anyways, I was able to purchase a pair they were called tennis shoes, and they were not really basketball shoes, but they were cheaper. So, like, they would slide across the floor, and you just had a little rubber elastic across.
They were sneakers.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sneakers. Yeah. What would they call them? Tennis shoes.
Yeah, tennis shoes. Yeah.
But that was actually the tool I had to start out playing basketball. In fact, the side of them would rip out. We'd take a cardboard box and kind of fill in that little gap right there, and cautiously run and made my moves on the basketball court.
So you were starting to play basketball,
yes.
At that point on outdoor gyms, more outdoor courts most of the time. I assume there were no indoor gyms in Chipley at that point. I assume.
Absolutely not, Paul.
Yeah.
we had later on, but in that little small community, we played other little small towns, little communities as well, and. You're right when you said outdoor court, not indoor court. And if you think in terms of North Florida, in those times, the weather, it's pretty cold. I mean, it get really cold. I mean, down in the 30s. In fact, occasionally times we've had snow. We had snow, and it certainly was a difference playing basketball outdoors in an organized game. But we thought that we had a better situation than most of the other communities because the court was paved and everybody else had clay courts. Huh. Yeah. So that was one of the things that would assist the fans to help them to maintain warmth was they had big barrels around the court, and they would put logs in those barrels in order to keep the fans warm. But you can imagine the players with the little shorts on and out running up and down the court.
Sure.
And
so what did take you, though, across the state line into Alabama? How did that happen that you ended up going to Carver High School up in Alabama?
Well, actually, after returning, I lived in New York for a short period of time, but returning to Florida, the schools were starting to integrate, and then, but most part in the summer, we didn't have any recreation activities, so we would take a bus once a week and go and drive to Dothan, Alabama, and we would have our social activities, which was swimming, and I had an opportunity to play a little bit of basketball during that time frame, during that visit. So from that point, I felt that there was a better opportunity in Dothan for me, so I was able to meet and greet some people that would allow me to move to that location, relocate from Florida to Jacksonville.
And
Chipley.
did you just had told me at one point that your dad didn't have insurance money for football anyway, so football was left behind, and basketball was now the game of choice. When did you start to love the game? Did you start to thrive playing basketball?
Yes. I think it was, in fact, I know it was probably a little bit later around my senior year, close to my senior year, that I developed more of a love for the game because it allows me to actually didn't play that much on the team. So it allowed me to travel with the basketball team, which is a high school team, and of course to get away from all of my other brothers and sisters. But that's, I think, when I really start initially developing more of an interest in the game, is to the point that I really had a desire to play it in a competitive level.
So how did you end up at Gardner Webb then? What pulled you into the junior college experience, which eventually, of course, led to Jacksonville and the national title game? Can you share us that journey a little bit?
Right. After arriving in Dothan, Alabama, I really didn't prepare myself academically. I was struggling a little bit at that level. So after really competing, I think, in fact, we were playing in it was a holiday basketball tournament in Montgomery, Alabama. We played like 4 games there. But there was a number of coaches that was there visiting. And during that time, Eddie Holbrook, who was one of the coach at Gardner Webb, and he was there, and he and another great guy named George Ravelin.
Sure.
We'll ask George about that when we see him a little bit later on.
He'll be here for enjoyment.
But, George was there, and they both talked about it because George was working at that time at Villanova, and he had Howard Porter, and I was really interested in joining Howard Porter at Villanova, and certainly being his teammate. But because I said academically, we decided to go to attend Gardner Webb. Gardner Webb was a 2-year school at that time. We competed for junior college national championship a couple of times, but they was on the verge of turning into a 4-year school. But my friend, another real good friend of mine, and Ernie and I, we made a deal to go to Jacksonville. So that's why I ended up at Jacksonville. We played there 2 years, and of course my junior year we played for a national championship against UCLA, and came up a little short.
Oh, just a little short though. I mean, this was a great UCLA team, and you went from being a virtual unknown a couple of years earlier to being one of the best college players in history at that point. I would think you still hold a record for rebounds per game, an NCAA record. You took this modestly unknown or underserved Jacksonville team to the championship game against the powerhouse UCLA team and only lost by a few points. That's extraordinary. Did you enjoy it? Was it a wonderful ride? Were you thinking, man, I can't believe how well this is just exploding for me, and then great things to come?
Paul, it was a terrific experience and part of a growth period for me as well. and all of my colleagues that attended Jacksonville during that time frame. With Jacksonville, I'm continuing to work with Jacksonville at this day and time. Jacksonville's student population was approximate less than 2,000 students, and we had very limited other sports. Soccer team was very good, baseball was excellent, and we had a decent golf team. But beyond that, we had very few other sports activities at the university. We had a really small, modest gym, and all those things worked together. But we had a great group of individuals, and we were able to come together at an appropriate time to the point that we were competitive and played for a national championship.
Well, you averaged over 20 points and over 20 rebounds a game. I think you had a hand in that move towards the national championship game. And then happily, first, do you remember the championship game well? Does it stick in your mind?
Well, I remember getting beat. But it was really pretty special that during that time, the Final Four, the two runner-up, they said runner-up teams, the teams that played for the championship and lost, they played for
third and fourth place, right?
And then third and fourth place, absolutely, Paul. And then the national championship game, and I remember the lights, and you think back in that early time, there was only 3 networks, NBC and ABC. I think NBC with Kurt Gowdy was the call on that championship game, and the bright lights. It was a unique and really special time for me to step on the
you
stage.
You were drafted then by both the ABA and the NBA, and you made the, I'm sure, challenging choice to join the ABA, the Kentucky Colonels, new team on the way up. Motivated by a variety of circumstances?
Yeah, the circumstances we spoke about earlier, Paul, the fact that I grew up in, and you've heard this, we all heard this terminology, dirt poor.
Yeah.
But I think we was beyond that. so
poorer than dirt.
The decision to make to sign with the ABA, they set it up where it says, well, listen, for an extended period of time, you would receive X amount of dollars to be able to support. Can you imagine? You'll be able to support your family long term. And that was irresistible temptation, and so persuasive.
You were lucky at that point by making that choice. You also joined a great team and you had some great teammates who are lifelong friends, I know. I'd love to hear about your thoughts about Dan Issel and Louie Dampier and some of the guys who some of the folks here might not know what. We just didn't see the ABA in its prime.
Yes, Dan, whom also a Hall of Fame, and just recently Louie Dampier has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So that was just a really good collective, good group of guys, and very talented. Louie Dampier was one of the best, and probably still is one of the best three-point shooters in the game. I know everybody say, not young people say Stephen Curry.
Yeah.
But Louie was, in those earlier years, was an extraordinary player and was able to score from that perimeter. And likewise with Dan Issel. And we had a great relationship off the court. Occasionally we would have opportunities that go out and have dinner and just talk about our experiences on the court.
Well, you were the Rookie of the Year in the ABA and the most valuable player in the league, which is a kind of extraordinary way to start your professional career. I noticed you had some great coaches along the way in those 3 years of the 3 coaches you had over the years at the Colonels with Joe Mulvaney and Babe McCarthy, and then finally Hall of Famer Hubie Brown. I wonder what they brought to your growth and development as you were becoming a professional player.
Well, Paul, just as you explained, it was a growth period and a tremendous experience with each of those individuals, and of course, Hall of Famer Hubie Brown. I mean, just phenomenal. We were able to win a championship in 1975. So, and I watched Hubie over the years become just a phenomenal individual as well as a coach. I watched Hubie leave the NBA for over a period of 20 years and then return and become a coach of the year. So that relationship that we had in Louisville happened to be just an extraordinary experience.
I wonder if, because again, I always think that some of the fans, it's a shame that they didn't see the ABA as much. It was not as televised in many parts of the country. If you could share some reflections on some of those great players who you played against in the ABA. I think about Mel Daniels, for example, or Billy Paultz, or some of the guys who you might have matched up against. Marvin Barnes.
Yeah, George Gervin, Larry
exactly.
Keenan, and of course, there was another guy named Julius Irvin, Dr. J.
Yeah, him.
Yeah. But there was a number of those, Jimbo Akins, that it just on and on. Matt Calvin, just a terrific number of great players in that league, and certainly was able to make the transition, come over and be very competitive at in the NBA.
Well, they had opened up the floor a great deal. It was a very, I think the game was more open than the NBA game was perhaps in those days, offensively, and exciting to watch.
Yes, Paul with the three-point play, and this, of course, we look at the line, the three-point play. Excuse me, my voice. One of the things with the three-point play, and differ from during that time, was the established NBA, was that a three-point play, as most of you young people would enjoy playing the game, it provides an extension and pushes the players farther and farther on the perimeter, and that's one of the things that, you know, that everybody has an opportunity to enjoy this young fella, Stephen Curry, and he just have unlimited range. In fact, Paul, some people suggested from his range he should make it a four-point play.
Exactly right. Yeah.
But it all initiated from the ABA and what happened in those early years, and we talked about Louie Dampier and even Dan Issel, and so many other guys were able to knock down shots from those areas and provide that stretched area.
Absolutely.
And made it somewhat extraordinarily challenging.
I should mention, folks, we'd be happy to include you in the conversation. If you have a question that you'd like to ask Mr. Gilmore, please raise your hand. One of our staff will take you over here and line you up, and we'll be happy to include you in our discussion. I think back again, as the floor opened up, you had an extraordinary offensive scoring percentage. You are very high. But what struck me again in reading and thinking about your career was the extraordinary rebounding and defensive shot blocking ability that you had. How fast you were, how much of the court you could cover. Was that something you took great pride in at that point as you were developing your game?
In the early years, I had there was two idols, and I don't know if you divide them equally, but it was Bill Russell and of course Wilt Chamberlain, and each of those individuals had brought about two unique skills to the game, and Bill Russell was one of that, very much like myself, left-handed, and then just a tremendous shot blocker, defensive player, and certainly that was one of the person that was sort of encouraging and persuasive for me.
Sure. And then you joined the NBA. Unfortunately, the Colonels did not join the NBA when the other teams did, which I always thought was a shame because it's such a natural place for an NBA team to be thriving somewhere in Louisville or whatever. But you joined the Chicago Bulls and the Spurs, and eventually came to our beloved Celtics here up in Boston, and a remarkable career over that time. Was that an easy transition to leave the ABA to join the NBA for you? Was it something that you had to get used to the idea of moving on?
No, absolutely not. And I think probably the largest adjustment was moving from Louisville, Kentucky, and to Chicago. And one of the things you mentioned that Louisville, I mean, the Colonels was absorbed in the merger. And so even at this point in time, Louisville is a great city, and they love basketball, and certainly they're making an effort even at this point in time to become NBA franchisee. So with that, you know, no question that the game has been terrific.
Joining the Chicago Bulls, of course, you were teamed with that guy whose picture is kind of behind us there, Mr. Jordan.
Monsieur Jordan.
Exactly, and extraordinary talent to play with. Could you tell right away what a special player Michael was?
Oh yes, you know, and Michael was drafted in '84, and the two choices was it was Chicago Bulls and I think the Portland Trail Blazers.
Right.
And Michael has said, I think on a number of different occasions, that he was so excited that, you know, he was drafted by the Chicago Bulls. And in the early years, Michael had a very difficult time, but just an extraordinary talent. He was scoring an awful lot of points for a couple of years, and then eventually they added Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, and they become and John Paxson, who was a major impact for that group at that particular time, and they become an extraordinary player. But the question you asked was, what kind of a player was I able to observe? Well, it was pretty obvious that Michael was turned into just a special individual.
Yeah, it's amazing the talent you've been on the floor with and that got a chance to play with you. Ma'am, please come over, tell us your name and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
Hi, Mr. Gilmore. First, thanks for coming all the way up here from Jacksonville for the thing today. I really appreciate that. My name is Diane Root. I live right here in Northborough, Massachusetts. And my question for you is, you know, I think a lot of people, young people that play the game today, probably don't remember a time when there weren't a lot of people of color playing basketball, and maybe there were some experiences you might have had early on with discrimination. And I'm wondering if you might be able to share maybe a little bit about that with the young people here today to give them a historical sense of what it was like back then to play in that capacity.
Diane, thank you for that question. Now, we sort of skirted around that a little bit early on in the conversation. When thank you very much, but yes, we spoke about the discrimination, and I mentioned sort of in a very quick touch on that subject. I said schools were starting to integrate it, and back in 1966 or 67, in a little small town like Chipley, Florida, is really, and I one of my favorite words in my vocabulary is challenging, and that's to make it simple that was an extraordinary, challenging time. So, like I said, early on, I ended up moving from Chipley and finishing high school in Dothan, Alabama, which was a predominantly black school. And you speak in terms of what it was like in Chipley. It was, Alabama was tough, but it was a lot tougher in smaller towns like Chipley. Thank you, Diane.
Please come on over, Mr. Celtics fan, and tell us your name and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
Hi, my name's Josh. I have a question for you, Mr. Gilmore. What was it like to be in the ABA?
What was it like to be in the ABA?
Josh, thank you for that question. And in the ABA, back in those times, it was really different. The NBA was a very well-established league, and the ABA was a really developing league. And I'm going to share a couple of things that's kind of quick here. The reason the ABA was able to sort of catch up with the NBA just a little bit is because of the rules, the draft rules. The NBA established NBA rules were that you had to spend 4 years in college, complete 4 years, or graduate before you were eligible for the draft. And the ABA rules were that underclassmen they were able to draft underclassmen. In fact, Dr. J was underclassman from UMass. Michael Jordan was a underclassman. Well, even before then, who else?
Spencer Haywood, of course.
Spencer Haywood. In fact, Spencer Haywood, he sent a whole new. But I don't know, a trivia question. Did you know that Moses Moan was the first player drafted from high school in Petersburg, Virginia. But I think that was the difference, Josh. That was one of the difference that allowed the ABA to
Younger players to come in and thrive.
young players to come in and catch up, and plus, the NBA had access to television. There was only 3 networks during that time, but anyways, I hope that answered your question, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, thank you.
Come on over, pal. Tell us your name and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
Hello, Mr. Gilmore. My name is Bradley, and my question is, how has the league changed since from you played to now?
Okay,
What a great
Bradley.
question. Great question.
Great question. It has changed tremendously. And one of the differences, I think the basketball, they said the NBA, instead of NBA, you might use that term almost like WNBA, World Basketball League. And because the NBA has been able to collectively go across the globe and able to bring in very different talents and unique talents. And one of the things that allow the league to be able to change is the great players from those different countries. And we mentioned how Stephen Curry is able to stretch the floor, and that's what these other players are able to bring to the game as well. They're just tremendous, outstanding shooters from the perimeter. And one of the great teams in the league today is Golden State Warriors, and they stretches the floor and allow guys to shoot from the perimeter. And each of the teams that able to shoot, take shots, tremendous shots from the floor, is the teams that's having tremendous success, Bradley. And I think that has been the difference. You mentioned the fact that one of the difference is when I played with my back to the basket on the floor, but we still had great players who was able to, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which early on was Lou Alcindor. We also played near the basket, and we were able to take high percentage shots. But yes, I think one of the terrific changes are the additional players from all over the world, Bradley.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you for your question.
Sir, your name, please, and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
My name is Jerry Roberts. Mr. Gilmore, I'm older than you, so I followed your career.
Jerry Roberts, I'm not so sure you're older than me.
So I was able to follow your career, so it was
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
My simple question is, what was your vertical leap?
Oh, great question. Vertical leap. Everybody knows what vertical leap is. That's when you're able to jump over a dime, right? No, probably about 45 or so. If you have an opportunity, you go to, I'm suggesting, I'm not selling anything, but Artis Gilmore website, and there's one photograph in there that me touching above the backboard, actually my wrist and everything is above the square, blocking the shot. So, in the backboard, because anybody has a trivia question real quick, answer, what is the length of the top of the backboard? What is it, sir? I didn't hear.
Sorry, can't hear you. It's okay. We'll pick it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just threw it out there.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
The top of the backboard is 13 feet, and the rim, from the floor is down, is 10 feet. But actually, my width, you mentioned vertical jump, the leap. So I was at the top. I would always use that term. I can jump up and put change up on the top of the backboard. That's not true, but I could touch the top of the backboard.
Thank you.
I didn't get your name before. Jerry, thank you so much, and especially, guys back in the early years and kind of sharing those earlier memories with me. But thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Come on over, pal. Your name, please, and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
Hi, Mr. Gilmore. My question is, so you know how you said your shoe size was 13 and 1 year 13, right? What's your shoe size now?
You know something? You didn't give me your name, and I'm mad about
sorry.
that.
My name is Arthur.
What your name?
Arthur.
Arthur. Arthur. When I was, man, can you imagine? Now, I'm just going to preface this for you. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Actually, now I wear 18. They stopped that. My foot sort of slowed down at about 17. And then later on, when I was playing ball, I was about, I played probably about 250 or so. Now, can anybody guess what my weight now? Anybody want to try? Arthur, how about it? Can you guess? 250 before now. Can you imagine adds a few pounds to that?
290?
All right, okay, that's pretty good, Arthur. I'm actually now 300. So you're going back to that shoe size, 19s now that I've pushed a lot of my weight down and spread the foot out. 19s feel so much comfortable.
Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you so much.
Come on over, ma'am. Your name, please, and your question for Mr. Gilmore.
I'm Nasra, and my question, Nasra? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, don't worry. Did you ever dream of being an NBA star? And if so, what motivated you?
Okay.
Nasra. Nasra is
Nasra. Okay.
And did you ever dream about being an NBA star, and what motivated you?
Okay. Thank you for that question, Nasra. No, that was the farthest thing from my mind. You know, when I was a kid growing up, and I briefly sort of touched on the subject, it would take a whole entire lifetime to kind of explain what it was like, kid growing up, hungry, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, where you're going to be able to get that, and a place to sleep, and things. An opportunity to play in the NBA, that was the farthest thing from my mind. And I think I was really excited about the fact when, and everybody, when you hear an individual encouraging you by saying, telling you things to do, all of you, and the one thing all your parents do is encourage your kids. But when you hear things in a negative way saying, you're never going to be anything, you're not worth anything, you're not worth a dime, and you hear that term over and over, sometimes if you have the strength to overcome those kind of negative thoughts, then positive things happen. Like I was able to think that there was an opportunity for me to enter school. Other than my parents being able to pay for anything, that was not going to happen. But then just to focus on that opportunity to go to enter college. And once we excelled in college, and then that other view was right around the corner of playing professional basketball. Nazareth, thank you for that question. You know, as I know as I was reading through your book, which is a wonderful book again, and I hope everyone gets a copy of Here Comes the A-Train by Mr. Gilmore. You played against a lot of great players and with a lot of great players along the way, but I noticed that your book is dedicated to two women in your life. Could you just share who they are? That's my mother, my wife, and my daughters, absolutely. Yes, my mother was really a truly inspiration, and if you guys have an opportunity, there's one little segment in there that I talk about my mom and what an inspiration she was when I was, of course, a kid growing up. And my wife, his name is Enola Gay. We've been married for 46 years. We celebrated. Thank you. It's okay. Thank you. We've been my lifelong partner, and I have 3 daughters. My oldest is Shauna, and then there is Priya and Tiffany, and then I have 2 boys. I had Otis James. He was named after his grandparents, and then Artis the second. He's the extra. He came along a little bit later, so joined the family. But anyways, the reason and one special one, my wife, Enola Gay, her name is Enola Gay, and most of us, looking at all these young people here, they would not know, identify that name, Enola Gay, right? Enola Gay was tragic enough in our history, was one of the plane that dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima in Japan.
Was named Enola Gay.
Enola Gay was the name of the plane.
Yeah.
So our parents had an opportunity, was watching that movie, and they was expecting a child, and they said, if we have a daughter, we're going to name her Enola Gay. So Enola Gay is the lady that I was able to meet in my life and married, and my lifelong partner.
Well, I know she's been an inspiration, and you've been an inspiration for so many of us, and a joy to have you with us today. I know that everyone would like to come over and get an autograph and say hello, but before they do that, would you join me in one more round of applause for our special guest?
Thank you. Thank
Mr.
you.
Artis
Thank you so
Gilmore.
much. Absolutely.